In this chapter, I'm on location in the beautiful wilds of Wyoming, venturing out into the Grand Tetons where we have a ton of incredible landscape shots that will yield mesmerizing time-lapse. No matter where you look, there's a vista that's begging to be captured. One of the biggest reasons for visiting this area is just how diverse the landscapes are, as well as the compositions. This area really lends itself to both ultra-wide-angle shots as well as tighter telephoto lengths, especially when you concentrate on the mountainous regions. The weather was a huge factor in determining where we shot and set up, specifically because it wouldn't stop snowing, but after spending the afternoon scouting various locations to film from, I finally landed on the perfect spot with a gorgeous view. We just found our perfect time-lapse location, and as you can see right off in the distance here, we've got this really beautiful dynamic shot. You'll be able to see that we have a really beautiful foreground, middle ground, and background, and it's gonna make for a really wonderful time-lapse. And we have these really cool clouds in the sky. They're nice, puffy, and billowy, and it's just gonna be really magical to set up in time-lapse. Now, we are setting up a basic time-lapse, so anybody can do this. It doesn't matter what kind of camera you're using. All you need to have is a tripod, a camera, and an intervalometer. Before shooting, let's break down this specific composition. The reason I chose this spot is due to three factors. First, the clouds in the scene are large, they're well defined, and they have a lot of movement to them. This means we can set up a fairly short time-lapse and still yield a great shot. It could also leave time to set up other shots if I wanted a second angle. Second, the pathway in the frame creates a lot of depth, breaking up the image into a beautifully layered scene. If we want to add a slow push in or pull out, we have that depth, which is going to make it much easier to do and also look more believable in post-production. Third, we have some atmospheric breakup that's going to allow the sun to cast rays down onto the scene, which means we'll likely get some interesting lighting that sweeps over our landscape. This will create contrast in our shot and make it much more interesting to view. Now that we understand the composition, we can set up for the shot. All right, so I'm using the Sony Alpha 1 and I'm pairing it with the 12-24 G Master. This is probably one of my favorite lenses because it's perfect for time-lapse. You get these really wide open vistas like we have out here, and this lens just captures all of that beautiful gloriousness. Now, I am also using an internal ND filter on the back of the lens here, and it's a 10-stop ND filter, so that's gonna allow us to drag the shutter or create longer shutter speeds out in the broad daylight like this. So I'm gonna go ahead and set it up. Then I'm going to go ahead and frame up, take my lens cap off. Pro tip, camera doesn't work without the lens cap off. So we're going to go ahead and frame up our shot. So I'm going to be setting this somewhere in the 21mm range. I'll set it right there. And I always make sure that I check focus in both areas. So I'll turn the autofocus on. I'll wait for my green box to come up here, and then that's going to allow me to know that that's in focus. But I'm also going to punch in the camera and just look around, and using the touch screen, I'm just going to go through here and see, yep, everything looks in focus. This is great. So I have my shutter speed set at half a second. I'm using f4.0 right now, and I'm set at ISO 100. This is going to give me the cleanest image possible, and it's also going to allow me to really bring out those shadows, midtones, and highlights in post. I've also turned off anything auto. The lens is set to manual focus. There's no image stabilization turned on, and I've also got it set to daylight white balance. If you don't have an intervalometer, you can easily purchase one offline. There's plenty of external ones that you can add to whatever kind of camera you're using, but Sony does have an internal intervalometer, and it's probably one of my favorites to use because not only is it easy to set up on the camera, it allows you to have full playback in the play menu, which is really nice because after you're done shooting the time-lapse, you can actually see what it looks like. Next, we'll set up our intervalometer. Going into our interval shoot function menu, I'm turning the interval shooting to on. Then I'm going down to select my interval, and I'm going to change this from 3 seconds down to 1 second. The clouds are moving extremely fast, so I know that 1 second is going to create beautiful, buttery smooth clouds. After that, I'm going to change the number of shots to 400 to 700, and this is just going to give me a little more extra wiggle room when it comes to ensuring that we capture the light sweeps as they happen over the landscape. After that, we're done using our intervalometer. So we've got our composition all set up, our intervalometer and intervals are set. All we have to do now is hit the shutter button, and we're ready to rock and roll. Once our time-lapse is finished, I can play it back live in the camera using continuous playback to see how it looks. Let's break down the final shot now. First, here's what the shot looked like completely unprocessed as it is, straight out of camera. Because I exposed for the highlights in the scene, you can see that it's incredibly dark, except for the spots where the sun wanted to peek through the clouds. At first glance, it might seem like a failed time-lapse, but thanks to the amazing power of raw imagery and the dynamic range of the camera, we can pull out a ton of information and create a much more compelling and cinematic shot. As you can see, we can isolate the highlight information in the clouds while also bringing out the shadows and the midtones in the shot. This balances out the image and allows us to see the frame more naturally, as if we were viewing it live on site. Since the exposure was varying in the clouds versus the foreground, I was able to brighten up the base, retain a good noise pattern, while also smoothing out the cloud exposure. I then added a bit of contrast, saturation, and played with the color a bit to get a much more robust shot. The next thing I did was add a small pull-out to this shot, giving the frame some movement, which then adds another layer of interest to our frame, and then also gives us our 3 time-lapse elements, which would be cloud movement, exposure change, and frame movement. In this side-by-side comparison, you can see just how pivotal and important image processing is to the final look of our time-lapse shot. 70% of what the final image is going to look like comes from the processing phase of post-production and is quite literally the most important part in producing cinematic time-lapse. In our next chapter, we'll discuss the best workflow for time-lapse and also show you how to finesse the image and create a style that suits you and your client's needs. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.